Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Centrella. I'm the Director of Development here at WAMU. As a public media organization, our mission is to connect listeners and members like you to each other and the world. Public radio works because listeners and members who value the service step up and give back. Support from listeners and members is not only our most reliable and important source of funding, it's also our largest. Thank you for your support of the Diane Rehm Book Club. If you've been enjoying the monthly virtual book club and want to give an additional gift to support this event series, you can give at dianerehm.org/give. We are grateful for all the people who registered to join us today. This event is being recorded and closed captioning is available. Just click the button on the bottom of your screen. And now, let us start the discussion with the host of our book club, Diane Rehm.
Thank you, Lauren, and hi to all of you. Welcome to the April meeting of the Diane Rehm Book Club. Today we discuss Mercy Street with the book's author, Jennifer Haigh. The novel centers around a women's health clinic in Boston and the lives that intersect there. The story is both an immersive exploration of abortion in America and also a series of deep character studies that touch on issues of class, misogyny, loneliness, and connection. Jennifer Haigh is the award-winning author of 6 novels, including Mrs. Kimball and Heat and Light, and a book of short stories. I'm delighted she's here with me today. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, Diane. It's thrilling to be here with you.
We'll be taking your questions throughout our discussion. You can type them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. Jennifer, you were actually a volunteer at an abortion clinic. I gather that's what set you going on this whole novel.
Yes, that's how it came about, which is very unusual for me. As a fiction writer, I don't have much of an autobiographical instinct. So this one kind of took me by surprise. I started volunteering at this clinic with no idea of writing about it. I started volunteering there because I believed in the work they did. And it was only after I'd been doing this for about a year that it became clear to me, oh, I actually do have to write about this. My work there was on a hotline. So I had several months of training. And on this hotline, I was answering questions from women who called wondering, questions about contraception, general gynecological questions, and also women who wanted to schedule abortions. So if you wanted to schedule an abortion, your first step was to talk to a volunteer like me who would talk you through the procedure and answer any questions you might have.
Were they mostly younger women?
Surprisingly, no. That was what I expected when I started volunteering there. But one of the things that struck me was the wide range of women who used the services of this clinic. There were callers who were very young teenagers. There were callers who were professional women in their 40s who wanted to schedule abortions. Interestingly, it was a real cross-section of the city where I was, that you had people from all backgrounds who lived in all parts of the city and indeed from other states. You had women who were speaking English as a second language. We had interpreters available for women who didn't have good command of English. So it really was a vast cross-section of women who use these services.
So you clearly learned a great deal about what goes on in an abortion clinic that you decided was important to share with readers.
Yes. Abortion is one of those issues where everybody has an opinion. No one is
Absolutely.
neutral about
Yeah.
abortion. And yet, strikingly, most of us know very little about the mechanics of this procedure, how exactly a woman goes about scheduling an abortion, what is involved. I myself didn't know the answers to those questions until I started volunteering at this clinic. It was really revelatory for me in many ways. Part of what struck me was the vast range of reasons women had for choosing abortions. I think, like a lot of people, I had this idea of a woman seeking an abortion as a very young, probably a teenager, probably still in school, certainly unmarried, possibly with no family support, no financial resources. And certainly there were some patients who fit that description, but wow, the range was much broader than that. So that was probably the first thing that surprised me about this work. The other thing that, and I can point to this, is probably the moment where I decided, yeah, I really am going to have to write about this. There was one woman who called the hotline with a 603 area code. So I guess she was in New Hampshire. And this call was so, made such an impression on me that it actually appears almost verbatim in the book, what I'm going to tell you. So this woman called, she wanted to schedule an abortion. And unlike some of the patients, she wanted to talk about the reasons why. Often women would call and they had already worked through all of this. All they wanted was an appointment. They wanted to get this experience behind them and get on with their lives. That was the most typical reaction. But this caller wanted to talk. And she told me that she had to have an abortion because if her ex found out she was pregnant, he would come to her house and shoot her kids. And I mean, this just stopped me cold. I mean, of all the reasons I had ever imagined a person would need an abortion, this one never crossed my mind. And, of course, I can't fact check this. These were anonymous callers. It's possible she was paranoid. She may have been delusional. But, I'm inclined to believe her interpretation of events. And the real lesson to me from this is that we can't possibly imagine the specific circumstances in a woman's life that lead her to need an abortion. And it is complete arrogance for anyone else to believe they know better than she does what is the right decision for her.
Do you have any idea whether that woman actually came to the clinic in which you were volunteering?
I don't know. I know that she made an appointment, and that's as much as I can say. Yeah. She did make an appointment.
Tell me about some of the other people who worked at the clinic.
Well, there were lots of volunteers like me, and a lot of them were, fairly educated women and women who were politically active, women who had progressive politics and really strong convictions about the importance of abortion. But the people who worked in this clinic as a profession, it was a different story. They were much more representative of the women who came to the clinic. It was a multicultural staff, multiracial staff. It was an all-female staff, interestingly, except for the security guard. And in fact, the clinic that I write about in Mercy Street, which is fictionalized, it kind of mirrors that reality. So the staff of the clinic was a lot like the staff of the Mercy Street clinic that I invented for the purposes of my novel. I volunteered at this clinic only one day a week. And yet every time I showed up for a shift, I had to walk through a gauntlet of protesters holding signs every single time. Sometimes there would be a whole crowd. Sometimes there would be just one guy there with a sign, but there was always somebody there. And I thought about the women for whom this was not volunteering once a week, but a daily job experience. What would that be like? Every day showing up for work, having to get past these people who are often not silent. They're often angry. They're often flinging epithets at you just for showing up to work. And that was really the beginning of the novel. The novel opens with Claudia, the main character, who's a counselor at this clinic. It opens with her looking out the window of the clinic, counting heads, counting the protesters who were there on Ash Wednesday.
Tell me about Claudia. She had a very, shall I say, unfortunate upbringing. It was tough.
Yeah. Claudia grew up in rural Maine. She was born to a very young single mother. Her mother, Deb, was 17 when Claudia was born. In order to have her baby, she dropped out of high school and never finished. At the time Claudia, the flashbacks from Claudia's childhood that we see, her mother is working as a nurse's assistant in the county retirement home. Pretty exhausting, physically demanding work. To make ends meet, she also takes in foster children. So all throughout Claudia's childhood, there were 2 or 3 or 4 fosters sharing this single wide trailer that she grew up in. And that experience of growing up with foster kids really informs all her ideas about parenthood, about childhood, about what family is, and also what life is probably going to be like for a child who's not born into great circumstances.
What about your own childhood? Did you feel any relationship to Claudia?
Well, Claudia's childhood was a lot tougher than mine, but I did grow up in a small town in the middle of nowhere. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, it's actually Northern Appalachia, in a little coal mining town that was on its last legs by the time I came around. So that kind of rural poverty you see in Claudia's childhood was all around me when I was growing up. And there's another aspect of my childhood that's really relevant to this novel. This little town I grew up in was overwhelmingly Catholic. It was socially conservative. And I grew up hearing about the evils of abortion long before I even understood how you got pregnant.
Where?
For real.
From your own parents, from church, from aunts and uncles? I mean, where did you hear about abortion?
Church and school. I went to 12 years of Catholic school, and I can remember in 2nd and 3rd grade having nuns talk to us about abortion and what a terrible thing it was. The other thing that stands out from my childhood, and it really does figure into this novel, when I was growing up, it was a really common sight to drive down the highway and notice a homemade sign in somebody's backyard or somebody's pasture. And these signs would have anti-abortion slogans: abortion stops a beating heart. It's a child, not a choice. And these were homemade signs. They were not mass produced. Somebody had to go to the lumber yard, buy the lumber, cut the lumber, make the sign, paint the sign, and then drive to wherever it was going to go and plant it in the ground. And so when I was writing Mercy Street and I thought about a character who would be an antagonist, kind of an antagonist to Claudia, I thought of the people who make these signs. Who does that, and why? What is the motivation behind that? And that led me to develop this character, Victor Prime, who is an older guy. He's a retired long-distance trucker. And for many years now, he's been making these anti-abortion signs and driving around and planting them on people's land. In his decades as a trucker, he used to carry the signs with him and plant them on public land, kind of wherever he went. So that memory of those signs really opened up the character of Victor to me. And Diane, they're still up there. Back home where my mother still lives. Yeah, you drive 10 miles in any direction and you will see one of those signs. And I still don't know who put them up there, but they've been up there my whole lifetime.
Claudia has one, if we can call him a friend. His name is Timmy. And from Timmy, Claudia gets a weekly or monthly supply of pot. Tell us about Timmy and how he figures into this whole story. He's a sad fellow.
I have great affection for Timmy. In the novel, he functions as sort of a first responder in Claudia's life. She's got this really, really stressful job. She works at this clinic. She's been working there for 9 years. She counsels patients on the phone. She counsels patients in person. She goes through the gauntlet of protesters every morning when she reports to work. She's also worked at the clinic through bomb threats, through active shooter threats. They're kind of constantly under the gun at this clinic, figuratively anyway. And so there's this steady stream of threats that come along. And of course, Claudia and the other employees have no idea how serious the threats are. So that is sort of the background cadence of her life, this constant feeling of being embattled at work. And so her way of coping with this is to self-medicate with weed. So every 6 weeks or so, she runs out of pot and she swings by Timmy's and re-ups her supply and spends a couple hours with him. You know, they watch television, they watch car shows.
They don't talk very much, and yet she feels as though he's kind of one of her few friends.
It's true. The kind of work Claudia does is very isolating. It's the kind of thing that you can't talk about casually with people.
Right.
It's not a conversation you want to have with a total stranger, because you never know if the person you're talking with has some strong conviction about abortion. You may find yourself embroiled in a discussion you don't want to have with a stranger. Timmy is, they have a strange kind of intimacy, even though they know almost nothing about each other. For instance, they don't know each other's last name. And she's been coming to his apartment buying weed from him for a couple of years anyway. And they know very little about each other. So the television is kind of this interlocutor for them. You know, they watch TV and they comment about what's on the screen. And they both have a real interest in classic cars. So that's kind of their default television watching is a car show.
Jennifer, you really paint a clear picture of poverty. Tell me where that came from.
You know, Diane, I think everything I write is in some way or another a story about class. I never conceive of it that way at the beginning, but when the story or novel is finished, I can take a step back and say, yep, I wrote another story about class. And I suppose because of where I grew up, it's the lens through which I look at the world. And it's something we as Americans are very bad at talking about. You know, we're only starting to learn to talk about race, but I think we're decades away from talking honestly about class in this country. You know, as a culture, we subscribe to this myth that we are a classless society. We live in a meritocracy, that, you know, anybody born anywhere under any circumstances can make it in America if you work hard and you're talented and ambitious. And it simply isn't true. And so these sort of invisible realities of class overhang everything I write. I very often write about working class people because of where I grew up. It's not a common subject for writers of literary fiction in America, I think because most of them don't come from working class backgrounds. So because of the people I knew growing up, I have always known that people who work with their hands are capable of complex thought and subtle emotion. And, you know, I don't write stereotypical working class characters, and I'm in fact very offended by those depictions of working class people. So I've always written about people who, you know, work in coal mines, or who are prison guards, or who are, you know, nurses' aides, or do hair for a living. And it doesn't mean that they're not intelligent, exquisitely sensitive people. And that just comes up again and again in my work.
We invited people before this discussion began to send their questions in. Here's one. The damage done to women by the Catholic Church throughout the ages cannot be overestimated. Can Ms. Haigh comment on how the church damaged Anthony? Anthony is not a character we've talked about yet. You might just outline his background.
Okay, I will do that. So Anthony is a protester outside the clinic. And the connection to Claudia is that he buys pot from the same dealer. He is also a customer of Timmy's. Anthony's a young guy who is disabled. He had a workplace accident working on the Big Dig here in Boston and had a traumatic brain injury from which he has never completely recovered. So he is on complete disability. He lives with his mother. His whole life has been shaped by this accident he had at work. So Anthony is very identified with being a Catholic. He's a daily churchgoer. And he's a young guy who really mourns the loss of what the Catholic Church used to be. Anthony is a guy of, maybe my age, who came of age after Vatican II. And so this was not, the old church of the Latin Mass and the nuns and the long habits. And it's a sort of a modernized church that he views as kind of a lesser thing. But the church is still, it's very, very much a part of his identity. I love this question so much. This question about the role of Catholicism in the book. It is not a minor detail. It's really important. It is the reason why this story could only happen in Boston, which is still arguably the most Catholic city in America. And also, not coincidentally, the city where the clergy sex abuse scandal first exploded in the US in 2002. This is something I know a lot about. I wrote an earlier novel called Faith, in which the main character is a Boston priest who's been accused of molesting a child in his parish. So I've done several deep dives into Catholic life in the city of Boston. Setting this novel, Mercy Street, in the city of Boston was a very intentional choice on my part. So in the opening scene of the novel, Claudia is looking out the window at the protesters. The protest is being led by Catholic priests and Franciscan friars. It is a thing that Claudia is very aware of, that it is the Boston Archdiocese with its very, horrifying record of covering up the sexual abuse of children. It's representatives of the Boston Archdiocese who are weighing in on the evils of abortion. And it should be clear to anybody that the Catholic Church has a lot to answer for in terms of its leadership on sexual matters. And so Claudia finds it particularly galling that this Catholic Church feels qualified to pass judgment on the sexual choices of women and the options available to women when they have unplanned pregnancies.
And as you said, Anthony has been disabled by this damage to his head. So he accepts an assignment from Victor Prine, who sends him texts or emails asking Anthony to take photographs of women who are entering the clinic. And at one point, and I found this so powerful, at one point, Claudia herself is entering the clinic, and someone says to her very kindly, please don't go in there. Don't do anything you'd be so sorry for. And she pushes him aside and says, I work here. And his whole attitude changes. He becomes so unpleasant and unkind to her. And that, I gather, finally, she decides to park under the building.
Yeah. And that particular interaction with a protester, that's one I myself had. That is almost a verbatim altercation I had with a protester outside the clinic. And it was, what he said to me was what he says to Claudia, please, mother, please don't kill your baby. He called me mother. I'm not his mother. And I told him I work here. And his response to that was, abusive, to say the least, angry and abusive. And that whole gentle demeanor just fell away instantly.
I know you have a page you'd like to read for us. Would you do that?
Yes. So I'm going to set this up briefly. This section, these are Claudia's thoughts. She has a memory of a famous case. This is something that really happened in Boston. It was the murder of a small child. This toddler girl was found washed up on the beach, Boston, in a trash bag. And this was, a case that obsessed the whole city of Boston for months on end. Who is this child? Who killed her? How did she end up, washing up on the beach? And Claudia is thinking about that little girl and the way she suffered at the end of her life. And these are her thoughts. What made a person a person? Her mind and her memories, all that she had done and felt and known and created, thought and wondered and seen and understood. A fetus had no thoughts or memories. It had made nothing, understood nothing. And yet, this mute, unthinking knot of tissue, alive, yes, but unformed, unconscious, incapable of tenderness or reasoning or even laughter, was the life that mattered. The woman carrying it, the complex creature formed by 20 or 30 years of living in the world, was simply the means of production. Her feelings about the matter, her particular ideas and needs and desires didn't matter at all. A fetus was living tissue, no question, but it was not a person. A fetus, at most, was raw material. The woman carrying it could, if she wished, make it into a person. But what was the point of making yet another person when the woman herself, a person who already existed, counted for so little? Baby Doe had been a person, a little girl who felt love and joy, who delighted in her pink leggings and giggled when her toenails were painted, and who, in the end, felt shock and fear and betrayal and pain. As a fetus, she'd been protected by Massachusetts law, the 24-week cutoff. As a person, she was utterly dependent on a woman who couldn't raise her and didn't want to. Once she became an actual person, Baby Doe was on her own.
So powerful, Jennifer, so powerful. Here is another question. You seem to have a real depth of understanding of your characters' feelings, beliefs, experiences, inner thoughts. I'm interested in how you were able to develop these characters. For example, Victor, the misogynistic, bitter, and cynical older male. Was he a composite of people you'd experienced? And how did you go about developing his and other characters?
Well, writing characters as a novelist, it's kind of like being an actor. The goal is not to pass judgment on your characters, but to inhabit your characters. So some characters are very easy to write because they're close to me. They have the same values, they believe the same things. Claudia, in many ways, is close to me, so she was an easier character to develop. A character like Victor Prime, who has some really twisted ideas about women and about race, and some really dark reasons for doing the things he does in the book. That's more of a stretch. Victor Prime is, close to 70 years old at the time of the story. He's a Vietnam vet. He is a racist. He is a misogynist. He's a terrifying person in many ways, and not someone I'd like to think I have much in common with. And yet, as the writer, my responsibility to Victor is the same as my responsibility to Claudia. That whether or not I approve of these people or respect them or admire them, I owe them a fair representation. So what I'm trying to do is simply write these characters the way they would narrate themselves. So I'm writing Victor Prine, I'm telling his life story the way he would tell it, and explaining his reasons the way he would explain them. And the truth is, none of us are villains in our own lives. We believe always that we have good reasons for thinking what we think and doing what we do. We don't think of ourselves as villains ever. And Victor Prine, sure enough, believes he has very good reasons for doing as he does. So in the time I'm writing this character, I have to take his side. No matter how repulsive I might find that, I have to take his side in all things. And at least for the moment, adopt his beliefs and his worldview, even knowing that a few weeks later, I'm going to be writing a different character who believes just the opposite. No matter, I still owe that to Victor Prine to represent him the way he sees himself, with all his myopia, all his blind spots. Nevertheless, I have to show him the way he would show himself.
And the weather, it played such a powerful part in your novel. Why did you choose this terrible period of snow in Boston to set your tale?
Well, I lived in Boston during this particular winter. It was the winter of 2015, and nobody who lived here at that time will ever forget it. I grew up, with snow. I'm not afraid of the snow. I'm a good winter driver. I took my driver's test in a blizzard. I think of myself as an intrepid winter warrior, but that winter broke me. And it broke many of the people in New England. There had never been a snowfall like this in all recorded history in New England. 384 years.
How many nor'easters were there?
You know what? I don't know. We lost count. They just kept coming. And the problem was nothing ever melted. So you'd get a giant, dump of snow. You'd get a foot of snow in one day, and then it wouldn't melt. And 5 days later, you'd get another foot of snow. And it just kept piling up, piling up. And if you were living in the city, as I was, there was nowhere to put it. There was just nowhere to stack it up. We were drowning in snow. And it seemed like it was never going to stop. And that feeling of isolation, we were all kind of trapped in our houses. Years before COVID-19, we were all stuck in our houses for months on end. And it was snowing into March, into April, and it just wouldn't melt. And when I was thinking about this story, I felt that the isolation of that winter is, it's appropriate to this story. This is a book about really lonely people.
Yes.
They're all very isolated people. Claudia lives alone. Victor Prine lives alone. Timmy lives alone. Timmy also lives a very isolating kind of life. He can't leave his apartment or he doesn't make any money. The customers come to his apartment. There's no other way for him to earn anything. So he's trapped there, waiting for someone to come and buy weed. So in different ways, all these characters are very isolated people. Victor Prine is maybe the most isolated of all of them. He lives in this remote little town that's very much like the town where I grew up, in fact. So I personally understand that kind of isolation. And this goes back to the development of Victor Prine as a character. When I was thinking about an antagonist to Claudia, and I started developing Victor, it made sense to me that he would be from the place I was from. Because, as a writer, you work with what you already know. That's a part of the world I know so well. I understand the isolation of living there. And though I've never known a person quite like Victor Prine, I see his cognates everywhere. When I go back home, I feel like I've known that guy my whole life. You see him at the store, you see him around.
Anthony actually lived with his mother, but he regarded his church, the Catholic Church, as his daily place to go and to feel some sense of companionship and peace. And yet even the church lets him down.
Oh, this is heartbreaking to me. So for Anthony, his long, slow, and incomplete recovery from this brain injury was helped along by going to daily mass, simply because it gave him somewhere to go. It gave him a reason to get out of bed. It gave him a routine, and it provided him with a community. And I believe this is one of the great benefits of belonging to a church, is the kind of community it can create. Doesn't always, but it certainly can. And my own feelings about the Catholic Church are complicated. I was raised Catholic. My family was quite observant. I grew up in the kind of family where there was often a priest or a nun at Sunday dinner. And I idolized priests and nuns. They were really the heroes of my childhood. So some of my childhood feelings about the church are visible in the Anthony character. He feels that way too. And this community he has from going to mass every day, it's mostly much older women. That's who's at church every morning. It's women over 70, basically. There are no young people. There's nobody who needs to be at work. So it's a lot of retired people. But this is Anthony's entire social circle, are the older ladies at daily mass. And this is really a thing of value to him. And yes, he does get let down by the church ultimately, because it is what's happening in Catholic dioceses across the country and all over the world. Churches are closing because church attendance is way down, because the dioceses have acute financial troubles from settling lawsuits with people who were abused as children by priests. So Anthony eventually loses this sense of community because his church is closed. The parish is shut down because the Boston Archdiocese is trying to cut costs. They've got lawsuits to settle. So it is the one kind of community Anthony has ever had, and he loses it.
So for you, you said your relationship with the church is complicated. How would you describe it now? Are you still considering yourself a Roman Catholic who attends Mass, who believes, as many others do, that the Pope, for example, is infallible?
No, I don't. I'm not a believer. I'm no longer an observant Catholic. And part of it has to do with being a woman, to be perfectly honest. I feel that there is no place for someone like me in this church, where you have this elaborate, ancient male hierarchy, presumably celibate male hierarchy, pontificating to women about what they can do with their own bodies. And there has never been a decision made by the Catholic Church in which a woman was consulted. Never once in its long history. All of these decisions have been made by men, even the decisions that intimately affect women. And, the forbidding contraception and abortion, it makes women's lives impossible. It makes it impossible for women to have agency in their own lives, to make the choices that are right for them. If you are an observant Catholic, that is taken away from you. But there is a very narrow path you must walk. And as a woman, I won't walk it.
So as you went through this novel, as you began writing it, the abortion debate in this country was heating up, and we now have a case before the Supreme Court whose decision is expected within the next couple of months. Did you ever imagine the timing of this?
Diane, it's just incredible to me. It takes such a long time to write a novel that if you ever happen to write anything timely, it is just a colossal accident. Like you could not plan that. And in fact, I started writing this book, I think it was the spring of 2016. So Barack Obama was still president. That's when I started writing the book. And I never could have imagined at that time that we would be on the brink of losing Roe v. Wade as we are now. I never could have foreseen that. It is notable that I wrote this entire novel during the Trump presidency. And taking a step back from it now, it's very clear to me all the ways in which my frustration and profound fear for our country found its way into this novel. So it is certainly a product of its time. It is a product of those 4 years.
Are your parents, if I may ask, still living?
My mother is.
How does she feel about what you've written?
You know, I think this was a hard book for her. I should say first that my mother is pro-choice and Catholic, and somehow has found a way to thread that needle. And, you know, I have learned that she is not that unusual. I know lots and lots of Catholics who are still believers, who are churchgoers, who feel their faith very strongly, who are absolutely pro-choice. And that is a really hard place to live in. And I don't know how people do it. My mother is one of those Catholics. She strongly believes in contraception. She believes that abortion must remain legal and has felt this way for a very long time. So, you know, I can't tell you how many readers I have heard from since this book was published in February who are Catholic, who are very anguished about this and are trying to find some way to reconcile those realities. I don't know how you do it. My mother read the book early. She read it in manuscript pages, as she always does. She's a retired librarian. So, you know, having a daughter become a novelist, it's like having your son become the Pope. It's like the best thing that could possibly happen to a librarian. So she reads all my books. She is a great reader. And I think this book really scared her. And I think she was scared for me. It wasn't that she did not like the book. I think she very much admired the book. But I think she was afraid of people's reactions to it. And
are you scared for you?
You know, Diane, it's part of the reason it took so long to write this book. About halfway through, I kind of realized, oh my God, I'm going to publish this thing. You know, normally when I'm writing, I need horse blinders. I can't think about publication. I can't think about what my editor will make of this, what my agent will make of this. I simply have to block that out in order to do my work. But with this book, I started to think about that, of what the reaction might be. And it really scared me. And I think I started to drag my feet unconsciously. I didn't want to finish it because then I knew I would have to publish it. And there are a lot of people who have strong opinions about abortion who are a little bit nuts, to tell you the truth. And I did fear absorbing that kind of reaction from readers. However, I did not foresee a global pandemic. And so publishing this book in 2022 doesn't look like publishing my earlier books. Normally I go on a book tour, I'm traveling all over the place, I'm meeting lots and lots of readers from different places. Yeah. That hasn't really been the case this time. I've been mostly doing this, sitting in my study at home and, you know, doing Zoom conversations to talk about my book. So I've had comparatively little contact with readers. Had I known this, I wouldn't have been so scared and I probably would have finished the book sooner. So in a way, you know, there's an upside.
But what about reactions? Have you gotten reactions from readers, perhaps in the mail, through your publisher, angry comments, criticism because of your writings about both abortion and the church?
You know, surprisingly, I have not. I have gotten some responses from readers that have been very positive. And many of them have been from women who have personal experience of abortion. The dedication to the book is to the 1 in 4. And that's to the 1 in 4 American women who will at some point in her life have an abortion. It's a huge number of people, by the way. It means that every single one of us knows somebody who's had an abortion. We might not know we do because a lot of women don't feel free to talk about this. But 1 in 4 women, that's just a huge number.
Amount.
Yeah.
And you're right. I think that having women talk about it, some have come out and said publicly, very courageous women whom I'm sure have, in some cases, regretted having said so publicly, but nevertheless, you seem to imply a tension in the fight over abortion. Those opposed focus on the act, and those in favor want to talk about the broader context. Is that how you see it?
Well, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think that is the way I see it. A lot of people who are opposed to abortion, it's simply an idea to them. It's a religious belief in many cases, or a moral belief that this is just simply wrong. And it's sort of a black and white way of looking at it. And I'm interested in the reasons why people choose to do this. There was a fascinating study that has been done at the University of California called the Turnaway Study. And they have interviewed women who tried to get abortions and were refused because they were past the cutoff date. So in every state, there's a limit at the fetal age at which you can abort. So in the state of Massachusetts, at the time of Mercy Street, it was 24 weeks. Nobody in Massachusetts could get an abortion after 24 weeks. And so the study at University of California looks at the consequences for women who are turned away, who try to get abortions and can't. And the news is not good, I will tell you. They found that even 5 years later, those women who were turned away are 4 times more likely to be living in poverty than women who tried to get abortions and were successful in getting abortions. And it's a very well-designed study. So these are age-matched controls. They're women of, similar means, similar socioeconomic status, and they match the controls, and they look at the comparable outcomes for women who get their abortion and women who are refused. Also, the health consequences for women who are refused abortion are pretty sobering as well. They're more likely to have chronic pain. A couple of the women in the study actually died in childbirth, women who tried to terminate the pregnancy and were refused, and 2 of them later died in childbirth. So, it is a fallacy that abortion is a risky procedure. It's actually much, much safer than childbirth. You are far more likely to die in childbirth than you are to die from an abortion. It just simply doesn't happen.
And some people, some writers I've spoken with have said they had the ending as they began writing. I wondered especially about the relationship between Claudia and Timmy, and whether you had planned that ahead, or did that just sort of come about?
I'm a terrible planner. I never outline a story. I've never been able to do that. I tried to do it once. It sounds like a really good idea to block out all the events of the novel beforehand. So I tried, and I spent about 3 months. I wrote a great outline. And then I never wrote the book because I thought, I kind of felt like I'd already done it. So I realized I write novels for the same reason I read them, and that's to find out what happens. And so, if I already know what's going to happen, it almost isn't worth writing. So I discovered the story in the process of writing it. And in the case of Mercy Street, the ending surprised me completely. I had no idea that's where it was going to go. Yes. And, it's writing the first draft of a novel is for me a pretty nerve-wracking experience, precisely because I don't have a plan. And I always have this fear that I'm not going to find the right ending. We've all had this experience as readers where you start reading a novel, you're completely hooked. The first chapter is great. You love the characters, you love the language, you can't wait to see what happens. And the ending is so disappointing that you want to throw the book across the room. And the reader doesn't remember this as the novel with the great opening chapter. You remember it as the novel with the lousy ending. And so I always live in fear of writing the novel with the lousy ending. And that's why the first draft is just fraught with anxiety for me. Once I've gotten through that first draft and I've figured out the ending, then I relax a little bit. It doesn't matter how good the takeoff was if you crash the plane at the end. So once I know that I can land the plane, then I can do second draft, third draft, fourth draft with some confidence.
You know, I had sympathy for Timmy because he had to sell that beautiful car he had worked on, polished, primed, repaired, cherished for so many years. And then he had to sell it in order to create a secret storage place in his car to store the pot. He was traveling from Boston to Florida and back, and he had to pay thousands of dollars, and it didn't work. He sold the car to create those spaces, and then the gizmo didn't work. How could you do that to him?
Diane, it broke my heart to make Timmy sell the car. It was a 72 Barracuda. It's a great car. It's the car I want, and to make Timmy sell it, it was really, wow, that hurt me. That caused me real anguish. I love Timmy. Some of my favorite scenes in the book are Claudia and Timmy watching television together.
Yeah.
It's this sort of rare moment of rest in Claudia's life where she can, unclench a little bit and think about something else and be outside this pressure cooker environment of her job. I really like those scenes, and I have great affection for Timmy and for his car.
Are you still a churchgoer?
No.
Not at all?
No.
How does your mother feel about that?
It's not a new situation, and she's had a long time to get used to that. And she's fine. She's at peace with it. She understands the reasons for it. And we've talked a lot about it. She gets it.
I'm glad. I'm glad you've written this book, because there is so much here for all of us to understand. And one wonders the kind of strength it does take to work in a clinic like that with people so angry, with so many of these clinics closing. Where are all these young people and older women going to go?
It's a fair question, Diane. I mean, when you think about it, Texas is the size of France. It's a really big state. And if you are working at Walmart in Texas and you need to get time off work to have an abortion and somehow raise the money to have an abortion and somehow transport yourself to another state where you can do this, especially if you have other children someone needs to stay with your children and take care of your children. Yeah. Most of the women who came to the clinic for abortions were already mothers. So it's placing extraordinary burden on women who want to have this procedure. I don't know where they're going to go. The wealthy ones will find a way. It's a story about class. If you have deep pockets, if you are in control of your time, if you don't need to get days off work, if you can afford childcare, if then you'll find a way. But for a lot of women, it simply won't be possible.
The same issue, and also with the Catholic Church's involvement, is at work on medical aid in dying, something I've been working on for a number of years. And time after time, it is the Roman Catholic Church that steps into state legislatures to quash a measure. And it's as though the beginning and the end of life is under the same kind of pressure. Mm-hmm. And to those women, I would say it's her body. And to the people who are so sick, have suffered so much, and are ready to die, I would say it's their life. And so the same issue comes into play at the beginning and the end of life. You must feel that.
Yes, I do. And what strikes me is the breathtaking lack of compassion ultimately in the church. And that's a hard thing for me to square because, as I said, the nuns and priests I knew in my childhood were wonderful people. They were heroic people and some of the most compassionate people I've ever known. And yet the institutional church, displays this kind of callousness toward people's real needs at these very difficult junctures in life. And I'll never be able to make sense of it.
Well, I really want to congratulate you on this book. It's fabulous. And I thank you for writing it.
Thank you for having me, Diane. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you.
Well, and I love the fact that you and my daughter have the same first name. So thanks for being with us. And thanks to all of you for joining me today. Before you go, I hope you'll take a minute to fill out a short survey about this event. It's going to pop up on your screen. Our next meeting is going to be on Wednesday, May 25th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. I'll be joined by a panel of guests. We're going to talk about The Children Act by Ian McEwan. It's a wonderful book and one I think you will truly enjoy. Our book club is produced by Allison Brody. Kennedy Wright is our engineer today. Yanlin Zhang is our events manager. And the event would not be possible without the support of Virendra Silva, Julia Slattery, Lynn Kronberger, Lawrence Centrella, James Coates, Dave Tate, Wright Smith, and Michelle Morgan. A very special thanks to all of those people and to all of you who sign up each month for our book club. I would love it if you might offer some suggestions of your own. If there are books that you've read and you absolutely love, just send us an email. You can send it to drpodcast@wamu.org, and we will get those. But I'd really love to hear what books you've been reading, you've been loving, and would like to hear more about. Thanks for that. And I'll look forward to seeing you next month. Take care of yourselves and each other. I'm Diane Rehm.